Let me tell you something that'll save you 40 years of your life, because I already spent them so you don't have to, he says, leaning forward in a worn leather chair that has seen better decades, his eyes holding the kind of clarity that only comes when you've stripped away everything that never mattered in the first place, and you can feel the weight of 89 years pressing against the silence before he speaks again. Years that have carved deep lines into his face, but somehow left his spirit lighter, unburdened, free in a way that money never made him and never could. I was 23 when I made my first million, he continues, his voice steady, almost amused at the memory of that young man who thought numbers in a bank account meant something profound, who believed that the next deal, the next acquisition, the next zero would finally fill the hollow space that kept opening wider no matter how much he poured into it, and he tells you about the mornings he woke up at 4 a.m. with his heart racing, not from excitement, but from the terror of losing it all, the way he measured his worth by quarterly reports and stock valuations, how he missed his daughter's first steps because he was closing a merger in Tokyo, how he told himself it was all for them, for the family, for the security he never had growing up poor in a house where love was abundant but electricity was not. He describes the houses, 7 of them, each more magnificent than the last, each emptier, the echo of his footsteps in marble hallways sounding like the ticking of a clock he couldn't stop, couldn't slow down, couldn't even hear anymore above the roar of his own ambition. And he remembers the cars, the watches, the art collection that impressed everyone except the one person he wanted to impress most, himself. The boy inside who still felt like he was wearing hand-me-downs and pretending to belong in rooms where people spoke about things that had nothing to do with what makes a life worth living. I was 64 when I collapsed in my corner office on the 47th floor, he says, and there's no drama in his voice, just the flat truth of a body finally refusing to carry the weight of a soul that had been neglected for decades. And he tells you about lying on that carpet that cost more than his first house, looking up at a ceiling he had never really noticed before, realizing that if he died in that moment, his last thought would be about a spreadsheet, a projection, a number that would mean nothing to anyone in 100 years and meant nothing to him in that eternal second of clarity that comes when the body says stop and the mind finally listens. The heart attack didn't kill him, but something did die in that room, something that needed to die, and he spent the next 6 months in a hospital bed that felt more like a cocoon than a prison, stripped of his phone, his email, his ability to make deals or move markets or prove anything to anyone, forced finally to confront the question he had been running from since he was that poor kid watching his father work 2 jobs and still come home smiling, still have time to throw a baseball, still know something that took him 40 years and a near-death experience to understand. What actually matters? He asks, and he lets the question hang in the air because he knows you think you know the answer, just like he thought he knew, just like everyone thinks they know until they're forced to really look. And he tells you that it's not what the inspirational posters say, not the simplified bullet points about family and health and gratitude that sound so easy and prove so difficult to live, but something deeper, something harder, something that requires the courage to fail at everything else first. He talks about connection, not the networking kind, not the LinkedIn connections and business cards and let's do lunch that he mastered and collected like scalps, but the terrifying, vulnerable, inefficient kind where you sit with someone you love and say nothing important and everything true, where you let them see you not as the successful man you constructed, but as the frightened child you never stopped being, where you stop performing long enough to actually be present, actually listen, actually allow yourself to need and be needed in ways that don't show up on any balance sheet. He describes the afternoon 3 years after the heart attack when he finally went to his daughter's house, not to solve a problem or write a check or make an appearance, but to sit on her porch while her children played in the yard, and how she looked at him with suspicion at first, this man who had been a stranger in her life despite providing everything money could buy, and how he didn't try to explain or apologize or promise to change, but just stayed day after day, week after week, until the suspicion softened into curiosity, and the curiosity into something that felt like the beginning of trust. And he tells you that the afternoon she finally put her head on his shoulder while they watched the sunset was worth more than every deal he ever closed, every zero in every account, every award and recognition and validation he had chased like a man dying of thirst, pursuing mirages across a desert he created himself. He speaks about time, not as a resource to be optimized or managed or leveraged, but as the actual substance of life itself, the medium in which love either grows or withers, and how he spent 40 years treating it as his enemy, something to be conquered and controlled and maximized for output, when all along it was asking only to be honored, to be given without expectation of return, to be wasted gloriously on conversations that go nowhere and walks that serve no purpose, and moments of pure presence that produce nothing but the quiet certainty that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. He remembers the Tuesday morning, ordinary and unremarkable, when he woke up without the urge to check the markets, without the anxiety that had been his constant companion for decades, and realized that he had finally learned to want what he had instead of pursuing what he thought he needed, that the hunger that had driven him was not for wealth but for worth, not for status but for significance, and that these things could not be acquired or accumulated but only cultivated through the slow, invisible, unglamorous work of showing up for your own life every single day. He talks about regret, not to wallow in it, but to offer it as evidence, as the proof that transformation is possible even when it seems too late, even when the years feel wasted and the patterns feel permanent and the person you were seems too powerful to overthrow. And he tells you about the letter he wrote to his younger self, not to warn him, because he knows that warning would have been useless, that he needed to walk every step of that road to arrive at this understanding, but to forgive him, to recognize that the boy who became the man who became the prisoner of his own success was doing the best he could with the tools he had, believing in a story about what matters that the world had sold him and that he had bought without reading the fine print. He speaks of his wife, gone now 5 years, and how he spent 30 years married to her without ever really seeing her, treating her like a supporting character in the story of his ascent, and how in the last decade of her life he finally learned to study her like the most important text he would ever read, memorizing the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the sound of her breathing in sleep, the particular silence that meant she was worried but didn't want to burden him, and how he carries those details now like sacred objects, more precious than any possession he ever owned, and how he would trade every dollar for one more ordinary afternoon with her, one more chance to choose her over a conference call, one more opportunity to be the husband she deserved instead of the one she settled for. He tells you about the freedom that comes when you stop trying to win, when you release the grip on the narrative of your own importance, when you accept that you will be forgotten, quickly by most, slowly by some, eventually by all, and that this is not tragic but liberating, the permission to stop performing and start living, to make choices based not on how they will look, but on how they will feel, not on what they will produce, but on what they will mean. He describes the morning ritual he has now at 89 that has nothing to do with productivity, the slow preparation of coffee that he savors like a meditation, the walk to the park where he feeds birds who don't know or care about his net worth, the conversations with strangers that go nowhere and mean everything, the hours he spends writing letters to people he loves, not emails, but actual letters, with stamps and waiting, and the physical evidence that someone took time to think of you specifically, to choose words carefully, to send something that cannot be deleted or archived or forgotten with a click. He speaks about death now without fear, not because he believes in any particular afterlife, but because he has finally learned to live, and he knows that the measure of a life is not its duration or its accumulation, but its depth, its capacity for love, its willingness to be changed by encounter, its courage to remain open even when openness means pain, even when it means loss, even when it means admitting that everything you thought you knew was wrong and you are starting over at an age when most people have long since stopped growing. He wants you to know that it's never too late, that the moment of recognition is always available, that the prison of your own making has had the door unlocked the entire time, and the only question is whether you will walk through it, whether you will let yourself be seen as you are rather than as you wish to be seen, whether you will risk the vulnerability of a life measured by connection rather than achievement. He tells you that the money he spent 40 years chasing is now just a tool, neither good nor bad, capable of amplifying either greed or generosity depending on the soul that wields it, and that he uses it now to create experiences for people he loves, to support causes he believes in, to remove the anxiety of survival from those who still need to learn what he learned, that survival is not living, that security is an illusion, that the only real wealth is the ability to look back on your choices and know that you chose love, that you chose presence, that you chose the hard right over the easy wrong, even when no one was watching and no one would ever know. He ends where he began, with the urgency of someone who knows that time is not infinite, who has seen too many people die with their music still in them. Too many people realize too late that they majored in the wrong things, invested in the wrong accounts, built monuments to their own ego that no one will visit when they're gone. Don't wait for the heart attack, he says. And his voice carries the weight of 89 years and 40 years of chasing and the final hard-won understanding that the only thing you can take with you is what you gave away. The only thing that lasts is love. The only thing that matters is whether you had the courage to be fully, messily, imperfectly human in a world that will try to sell you every distraction from that terrifying, beautiful, essential task. He sits back in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his years and somehow younger than you feel, and the silence that follows is not empty but full, charged with the invitation to stop listening and start living, to close the gap between what you know and what you do, to choose today, this hour, this moment, to be the person you will wish you had been when you are 89, and looking back on the story of your life, hoping it was a story worth telling, a story of love chosen over fear, of presence over productivity, of the brave daily decision to matter to the people who matter most.